Hey everyone, welcome back to Corporate Decoder, the place where we make sense of the confusing world of corporate filings. And today we are diving deep into Orchid Island Capital's latest 10K report, a bit of financial wizardry from this specialty finance company that deals with mortgage-backed securities. Now, what is the big story here? Well, Orchid Island Capital, or Orc as it is commonly known, is basically a company that invests in mortgage assets, and they make money from the difference between the interest they earn on those assets and the cost of borrowing money to buy them. They also use a lot of financial tools called derivatives to manage risks like changes in interest rates. Their goal is to give investors a good return over time, both from the value of their investments going up and from regular payments. They fund a lot of their investments by borrowing money for short periods through something called repurchase agreements. Let's jump straight into the financial performance. For the year ended the 31st of December, 2025, Orchid Island Capital reported a net income of a whopping $159 million. That is a huge jump from just $37.7 million in 2024. And remember, they actually had a net loss of almost $40 million back in 2023. So clearly 2025 was a much better year financially. Looking at the core business, the net interest income, the money they make from their investments minus their borrowing costs really tells a story. In 2025, this was about $108.3 million. Now compare that to 2024 where it was just a little over $5 million, and in 2023 it was a negative number, meaning they spent more on borrowing than they earned as interest. This improvement in net interest income is mainly because they earned more interest on their investments, and also their cost of borrowing went down. Speaking of borrowing costs, their average cost of funds on a GAAP basis went down to 4.27% in 2025 from 5.35% in 2024, which helped a lot. But it is not just about earning interest. These companies also have to deal with changes in the value of their investments. In 2025, they had unrealized gains on their mortgage-backed securities and US Treasury securities of over $200 million. That is a big swing from 2024 when they had unrealized losses of almost $80 million. This kind of volatility is pretty common when you are dealing with these types of financial instruments, and shows how changes in interest rates can really affect the balance sheet. Now about expenses, their total operating expenses were about $20.5 million in 2025, which was higher than the $16.7 million in 2024. A big chunk of this increase is due to higher management fees, which makes sense because when the company performs better and has more assets, the fees paid to the manager go up. They also talk a lot about something called economic interest expense. In simple terms, this is their actual borrowing cost plus the effects of their financial tools called derivatives, which they use to manage interest rate risk. In 2025, this economic interest expense was about $222.4 million. And their economic net interest income, which is what is left after accounting for these derivatives, was nearly $191.6 million. Let's touch on capital management. The company has a stock repurchase program. This means they can buy back their own shares from the market. In 2025, they repurchased over 1 million shares, costing about $7.3 million. This is a way for them to return value to shareholders when they think their stock is undervalued. Now, understanding the risks is super important for any investor. Orchid Island Capital is heavily exposed to changes in interest rates, which can affect both the value of their investments and their borrowing costs. They also face prepayment risk, meaning borrowers might pay off their mortgages faster than expected, which can be bad, especially for certain types of securities they hold. And then there is spread risk, which is when the difference between the yield on their mortgage-backed securities and benchmark interest rates widens or narrows, impacting their profitability. A really key part of their operations is how they value their mortgage-backed securities. Since they use fair value accounting, they get their valuations from independent pricing sources and broker quotes. But as the auditor mentioned, this requires management to make judgments and assumptions. This is a critical area because the reported values of their almost $11 billion in mortgage-backed securities as of December 2025 heavily depend on these estimates. If these estimates are off, the financial picture could look quite different. The auditors also pointed out that this valuation process is a critical audit matter due to the complex judgments involved. And speaking of auditors, BDO USA, PC audited their financial statements for 2025 and 2024 and gave them a clean opinion, meaning the financial statements likely fairly represent the company's financial position. They also audited the company's internal controls over financial reporting and also gave an unqualified opinion. It is important to remember that Orchid Island Capital is externally managed by Bimini Advisors LLC. This means their actual day-to-day operations and investment decisions are handled by another company. While this can offer expertise, it also introduces potential conflicts of interest, which are clearly laid out in the report. They also rely heavily on technology and face cybersecurity risks, which they address through a third-party security firm and regular board oversight. Overall, the company's financial performance in 2025 showed a strong comeback. They earned a lot more money compared to the previous couple of years. This was largely thanks to lower borrowing costs and good returns on their mortgage. Backed securities investments, they are also actively managing their capital through stock buybacks and issuances. However, investors should be aware of the significant risks, particularly those related to interest rate fluctuations and the complex valuation of their assets. Their reliance on their manager also means that conflicts of interest need to be watched closely. Alright, that is our breakdown of Orchid Island Capital's latest filing. What is your take on these numbers and what they signal for the company's future? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If this analysis was valuable, hitting that like button really helps, and subscribe for more deep dives. Don't forget to check out the Discord in the description. Thanks for watching. See you next time.